Hey everyone, it's Ryan Hall. It's fall, it's football season, but who cares because the bass are biting right now. Clear Lake's going bonkers. There's big ones being caught every single day and tons of fish in that 2 to 3.5 pound class. I've been up there probably 6 of the last 10 weekends, been catching them. I don't think I've had a day less than 20 pounds over that course. And I'll kind of break down how I've been catching them. It's a hodgepodge, it's junk fishing, that's kind of what I do. But I'll break it down kind of how I did it. 3 baits, all you need. Rattle bait, a lipless crank right now is phenomenal. Okay, I've usually been starting out with that lipless crank, fishing primarily around pea gravel or smaller rock areas in coves or near coves. These fish are migrating back or have migrated back to where they spawn because the bait is pushing in. There's tons of shad on that lake. They're pushing into these coves, these pockets, and you can target, individual fish, or a lot of times this time of year, especially at Clear Lake, is big, giant mega schools. Okay, I found a bunch of them just cruising the bank, and you just pull up on them, and you'll catch 40 fish and 50 casts. It's insane. Okay, but using that lipless crank, I'm targeting this upper range here. That's going to be, I have it 10 to 15, but realistically it's 2 to 10 foot of water. Areas with that little chunk rock, throwing it out. You can straight retrieve that bait once you get it down to your depth, or you can hop it. A lot of guys are hopping or yo-yoing that rattle bait. And that's a fun bite. It's like fishing a jig. Hop or hop, hop, and that boom, feels like someone rung your bell. It's insane. I've been starting out with that early. It seems like those fish are more prone to school up and get on those shad early in the morning. After that bite wears off, anywhere between 9 and 11 o'clock, I like to pick up my mid-range crank. I'm using an IMA Pinjack 200, dives anywhere from 6 to 9 foot, depending on how heavy a line you want to throw. I'm running 12-pound fluorocarbon, and I'm getting it down to, on an average cast, 6 to 7 foot. So that is where I'm targeting the mid-range here. Like I said, 6 to 9 foot. If you make a real long cast, you can get it down to 9 and maybe tick 10 if you kneel and reel like Paul Elias. There's a throwback one for you there. But yeah, so basically with that mid crank, I'm looking for rock, big rock. At Clear Lake, there's lava rock. Anywhere where you have that lava rock, like where everyone's been sitting this time of year, Henderson, big lava rock. Everyone's fishing out deep, go up shallow. Pound that bank, and a lot of times you can catch those fish that are up, popping the bluegill, popping the shad, just running that mid-range crank because they're not seeing baits up there right now. They're seeing baits in 15 to 35 foot. So don't be afraid to run that shallow crank behind where guys have just thrown a jig, where they've thrown that big crankbait, okay? Like I said, that's an IMA Pinjack. It's become probably my favorite mid-range crankbait I've ever thrown. You can get it at Monster Fishing Tackle or a handful of other retailers. I just prefer monsterfishingtackle.com. They always have them in stock there, so check that out. After that, once the sun gets real high, you get into that 11 o'clock to 3 in the afternoon. If you're lucky, you get a little breeze that comes in on the lake in the afternoon there, if it wasn't already blowing right out of the gates. But that wind will start coming in around noon, 1 o'clock typically, and that's when your deep bite typically fires. That's when I'm pulling out the big plug. Okay, that crankbaits that are going to run anywhere from 15 down to 25 feet. There's a variety of them that, once again, Monster Fishing Tackle carries, and they have all of them in stock. But that's kind of where where this drawing is going to come into play. We start out up here shallow. That's what I prefer to do. But as the day goes on and you start moving deeper, Clear Lake has, in a lot of areas, 2 banks. It's got a stair step. Way back in the day, they put a dam up to raise the level of that lake. So there's actually another bank that's, depending on the time of year, down there in 12 to 15 foot of water, which is where our illustrations are. When you find these areas, these ledges that this lake has created, you're going to see bass positioned there with crappie, with bluegill, with shad, and crawdad mulling around down there, okay? What I've been able to do is go through these areas and line up on these ledges and air out the crankbait as far as I can and start dredging the bottom. But the key is you have to hit bottom because these fish are real tight right now, okay? Make sure you're down there dredging. You might have to change your line to a 10 to a 12 pound test, even 8 if you need to get it down even deeper, okay? The last time I was out there 2 weekends ago, I was fishing a ledge that looks identical to this. And I had fish marked all throughout it. And I caught a couple fish on a jig, okay? Just on a regular old football jig. But I saw there were more down there that I couldn't get to eat. And I couldn't figure out why they wouldn't eat, even after throwing spinning rods at them and all that other stuff. So I decided to pick up my deep crank. I deep crank with a couple different rods, but the one I've been using, 8 foot 5 power Dobyns Champion, or 8 foot 6 power, I'm sorry. And the reason I use that bigger rod is because I use it to air that bait out, because you need to get it down to depth. But also it loads real nice and it's real parabolic. So when you hook that big giant bass, it just loads and it just keeps them pegged, okay? So with that big rod, air it out. When you're not getting bit by those fish you're marking on the graph, air that big crankbait out and drag it right through the middle of them. A lot of times we as anglers think they're not biting. I'm gonna slow down. It hasn't been the case for me lately, especially at Clear Lake. When they're not biting, I go faster. So I threw my crankbait down there, reeled it real fast. It's, fast as I can on a 6:3-to-1 gear ratio reel, and got a couple of them to snap. And following this pattern of following the ledges and being able to get that big crankbait down to 15 to 20 foot and entice some of those fish to eat has really paid off for me. I've caught fish over 5.5, 6 pounds every time, up to 8.5 in the last couple weeks. So make sure you get out there, rattle baits, mid-range crank like I'm a pin jack, and a big heavy crankbait, something that's going to get down 15 to 20 foot and just get to cover in water. You won't get bit for a while, but when you do get bit, stop, because there's more, and that's how Clear Lake's fishing right now. So get out there, fishing's good before it gets too crazy cold, and go catch yourself some. Thank you.